The PharmCast is a podcast sponsored by the Maryland Pharmacists Association. I'm your host, Aaliyah Horton. I'm the Executive Director of MPHA. And in my role, I have the opportunity to meet so many fascinating people within Maryland and around the country that are engaged in the practice of pharmacy. They're stakeholders, they're innovators, collaborators, and advocates. And this is my opportunity to bring those conversations and experiences to you. And it's another way that MPHA is fulfilling its mission to strengthen the profession of pharmacy, advocate for pharmacists, and to promote excellence in pharmacy practice. My hope is that at the end of these conversations, you will leave informed, engaged, and connected to pharmacy and our Maryland pharmacy community. Okay, welcome to the PharmCast. Today's guest is Ryan Burke, and Ryan is the Director of Professional Affairs for the Pharmacy Technician Certification Board, or what we call PTCB, or what most people in the community know as PTCB. He serves as the liaison to state and national pharmacy associations, state boards of pharmacy, and pharmacy technician organizations. And that's how I've gotten to know Ryan over the years. And so before joining PTCB, Ryan was with APHA in practice and professional affairs and governance roles. So he has a good depth and breadth of all the things going on within the pharmacy kind of professional community. And what I think is great, given the context of our conversations, that you also are or were, I guess, because you are PharmD, you were a PTCB certified pharmacy technician and worked at Walgreens. And you also completed a post-grad executive residency at the in association management and leadership at APHA. So with that said, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Aaliyah. Happy to be here.
Great. I'm really happy to talk to you because what a lot of people may not really realize is that a lot of state pharmacy associations were not just organizations of pharmacists. MPHA in particular includes pharmacists, pharmacy technicians, and student pharmacists. And so what's happening in the world of technicians is important to MPHA, and also the advancement of pharmacy techs, and their advancement is also the advancement of the pharmacists and pharmacy practice overall. So
absolutely.
Many of the, and another thing I just mentioned before we kind of get into the whole conversation is that many of the national pharmacy associations actually serve on PTCB's governing board. And so I think that's really important to show how invested the sort of traditional pharmacist organizations are in pharmacy technicians. So before we get to all of that, I do want to talk about you. So you are a pharmacist, PharmD, and your career track is a little bit different than the sort of traditional dispensing role or working in a hospital system. So can you talk with us a little bit about how you got to where you are and how you chose this track? Because I think it'd be important not only for our technicians, but the pharmacists as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So when I was in high school, my parents made me get a job, like most parents do to high school kids. And at my high school, there was a job board where local businesses could post job opportunities for kids in high school. And the day that I went, there happened to be only one posting, and it was for a pharmacy clerk at an independent pharmacy in my hometown. And so I applied and was fortunate to get that job. And that was really what introduced me to the world of pharmacy. And I really liked, working in that small independent environment. And, since we're talking about pharmacy technicians, the pharmacy technicians there were the ones that trained me and really taught me everything I needed to know to survive as a person who had never worked in a pharmacy before. And so I realized at that point that I wanted to pursue pharmacy as a career, and ended up going to undergraduate in Northeastern Louisiana. I'm from New Orleans originally. And while I was in undergrad, I got a job at Walgreens. And that was where I sort of, got the other end of the community spectrum, working in a very busy chain pharmacy. And again, pharmacy technicians were really the people who taught me everything I needed to know in that role. And then when I was in pharmacy school, of course, worked as a pharmacy intern and ended up being at Walgreens for a total of 6 years. Probably around my third year of pharmacy school is when I was very involved with APHA. I served both at the chapter level and also at the national level within the student leadership of the organization. And that's really what opened my eyes to a lot of the, I guess, unique or non-traditional opportunities that are out there for pharmacists, and in particular, association work. And so I decided that I wanted to try to do a rotation with APHA, which I was lucky to be able to do, and then ultimately pursued their executive residency program, which just kind of kept me on this path of working in the association world. And after about 5 years at APHA, there was an opportunity that opened up at PTCB that was somewhat similar to what I was doing at APHA in terms of the kind of professional affairs realm, but allowed me to work more so at the state level, right, with organizations like MPHA and all the state associations, as well as boards of pharmacy, which is something that I really had an interest in. And so I've now been here for, I guess, a little more than 2.5 years at this point, going on 3 actually. And it's been really fun to kind of come full circle, that very first job working as a pharmacy clerk and eventually as a technician, and now working for an organization that I knew existed, but really knew nothing about as a pharmacy technician. Other than that, I needed to pass the exam to be able to keep working at Walgreens.
Okay. Now let me circle back to one thing you said when you talked about you're working with APHA and the role in professional affairs was very similar to what you're doing at PTCB. So can you talk about what that means when these large organizations talk about professional affairs? What's that department doing, or what are they doing?
Yeah, that's a great question, Aaliyah. I mean, I think the best way to describe it is, especially when I was at APHA, our goal in our department was to create things or be a resource for pharmacists to help them be better in practice, right? So that might be a toolkit, that might be some resource, maybe it's something they can share with patients. It's all sorts of different things. But aside from that, professional affairs departments in all of the pharmacy associations, and even outside of pharmacy, are kind of responsible for interfacing not only with other groups within the profession, but also outside of the profession. And that was especially true at APHA. So our department, would interface with folks in medicine or nursing or, all the other healthcare professions on, maybe some areas where we might collaborate on various resources. At PTCB, obviously our big focus is on pharmacy technicians, but we have to work with a lot of stakeholders within the profession, not only the state and national pharmacy organizations, but also employers, all the big chains, health systems, even independent pharmacies as well. Plus educators, right? Community colleges, high schools in some cases, technical or vocational schools that are training technicians. So the professional affairs or, sort of partnership development team at PTCB, as we're called, is responsible for kind of all of those external facing initiatives that we do within the organization.
Okay. And how did pharmacy school, or how is your PharmD degree helping with all of this? Because obviously, you're working in associations, there's a lot of the soft skills, the communications, the that's oral, written, digital, all of that. But how is your degree providing the foundation for the work that you're doing?
Well, I think for one, it's important when we talk to all of our stakeholders, especially the employers and the pharmacy technicians, that we, sort of understand the lingo and can also relate to what they're doing on a day-to-day basis in their pharmacies, or maybe if they're a technician that's going through a community college program, understanding kind of what they're learning and how they might be applying that wherever they might be working as an intern, or maybe once they graduate with their program. And so I think it's sort of understanding the landscape that has really helped me. Now, if you want to ask me about the latest and greatest diabetes drug, I probably don't know anything about it. But the other piece of this is making sure that I, keep a pulse on what's happening in practice. And so I do that by keeping in touch with people that I went to pharmacy school with, or, asking some of the employers we work with, hey, what are the challenges you're running into? Or, the pharmacy technicians that we get to meet at some of the conferences we travel to, what are you seeing out in practice? Because it is important for us to, to not just sit in what people like to call the ivory tower, right? We have to understand how what we're doing really impacts what's happening on the ground. And so I think, having a pharmacy background certainly helps with that. But, sort of that clinical knowledge piece of pharmacy school is like slowly trickling out of my brain over the years here.
That's what you guys always say, but it comes back. It's like riding a bike. I do talk to a lot of you all that have transitioned into these different roles. You guys always say that, but I know if you got put to the test, that stuff is ingrained in there.
Well, I would hope so. I would hope so. I've been volunteering a couple shifts at a mass immunization clinic in Virginia and actually giving vaccines. And this is the first time in almost 8 years that I've given vaccines. But it is interesting how some of that knowledge came back pretty quickly, and going through the screening questions and answering questions people have about the vaccines, things that I haven't talked about in 8 years. To your point, they did come back, which has been good.
I have faith. I have faith in the PharmD education.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's get into what you're doing and the impact that you guys have in what's happening at the state level. And I'll just give you an update. So, well, you guys, you follow the state legislative and regulatory changes and how they impact farm technician practice, and look at the trends like you talked about with education and training and certification requirements. And, for me, coming from outside of the pharmacy world, I'm not a pharmacist, I have really been fascinated by how every single state is different in how they handle pharmacy practice, technician practice, how they interact, how students can operate within the pharmacy settings and practice settings. And so I know that we connect with PTCB on a lot of that. So in Maryland right now, our Board of Pharmacy is looking at 2 areas. One is actually considering this in very preliminary stages, and they have public meetings, so I don't feel I'm fine talking about this. They've talked about adding a pharmacy technician seat on the Board of Pharmacy, which I think is very interesting, and then also going through a process for technician product verification, or tech check tech. I do think adding the technician seat is very significant. Because I do think I think representation is important, and that's across so many boards. Representation is important, and to have a governing body with no representation that has full authority over how you can practice without the actual input from the practitioner and just the employers, we need some fairness there. So I think that's a great move on their part. They've got to work through the details there, but they are moving. It's a slow process for this technician product verification. And can you talk a little bit about what's happening around the country on that and kind of explain it? Because there are definitely members of the community that are like, yes, let's do it. And we can talk about why. And then others are like, this is the worst thing that has ever happened to pharmacy practice. And so I know you're knee deep in that. So can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of passion on both sides of the issue. I think the first thing that I would say is we have to remember that technicians doing product verification, and historically it's always been called tech check tech, has really been happening for at least a couple decades, especially in health systems in certain states. So today, I think we have 19 states that allow technicians to do product verification in some form or fashion. In some states, it might be only in health systems and only for something like cart fill, whereas in places like Iowa, it's in the community pharmacy. They have technology in place to have safeguards, and it's something that they've been at for several years now. And the other thing that I think often gets overlooked when people get caught up in the emotional side of this conversation is that there have been studies around technicians doing product verification and the accuracy. And in all of those studies, technicians are as good, and in some cases slightly better than pharmacists, at catching the errors that are introduced in those studies. And that's not in any way to discount what pharmacists are doing, but that's just the reality of the research that's been done, right? And so essentially, product verification, in my view, enabling technicians to do that final check, making sure the right medication is in the bottle with the right directions. That's not something we can do without pharmacists, right? Pharmacists are still responsible for the making sure the medication is appropriate, checking for interactions, doing all of those things we would deem, quote, clinical. But what the technician is doing that final check, making sure it's the right medicine, right bottle, right patient, right directions, all that sort of thing. That frees up pharmacists' time. Just earlier this week, I was participating in a webinar where there was an independent pharmacy owner in Iowa who was essentially talking about how it makes good business sense to enable pharmacy technicians to do this, because now the pharmacists in his practice are focused on things like adherence and MTM and doing all these other services that at the end of the day are beneficial to patients, and the pharmacists aren't spending their time doing things that, in his view, are very much technical tasks that don't necessarily require that professional judgment of a pharmacist.
And just on that, I also think it adds a level of job satisfaction for the pharmacists as well, to be able to do those types of activities.
Absolutely. Yeah, both for the pharmacist and the technician. A few years ago, well, I guess a couple of years ago, we did a survey of the entire certified pharmacy technician workforce. And one of the things we asked them about was job satisfaction. And as sort of a follow-up question to that, what would make you more satisfied in your job? And aside from salary, which of course is number one for a lot of people,
right?
It was professional recognition, sort of that opportunity to advance in the role that I have. And so I think product verification is one of the areas where we can, empower technicians to help advance them in their careers. Obviously immunizations is the other big one that's such a hot topic right now. And I've been really encouraged that I think we're now up to 11 states that have made moves to permanently allow technicians to administer vaccines beyond the current pandemic. So hopefully that'll become a trend too.
Now, let me ask you that. So we just finished our legislative session, and there was a bill that was in for pharmacists to be able to kind of codify the emergency order for pharmacists to do immunizations from ages 3 and up. So when you're talking about the states that have codified it for them, is it for that age group for technicians to do that as well, or does it vary?
It varies, like everything else at the Board of Pharmacy level in the states, right? So in some cases, actually, the most recent couple that I have seen are actually allow pharmacists to delegate the administration of medications, biologics, or immunizations to pharmacy technicians or pharmacy interns. So whereas in other states, it's specific to influenza, COVID, those sorts of things, it doesn't allow for childhood immunization. So it really does run the gamut.
Okay. And so how has COVID impacted, beyond the immunizations, how has COVID impacted the work of technicians?
Well, I think one of the things that sometimes gets overlooked when we talk about some of the advanced roles for technicians, and in this case, immunizations, is that not every technician necessarily wants to administer vaccines or be engaged in product verification or take on these advanced roles. Some of them are perfectly happy being the behind the scenes support. And so with COVID, I think a great example of how technicians have had their work has changed or they've helped is with scheduling appointments, right? For COVID testing. Remember when early on the chains were doing drive-through COVID testing in their parking lots, and pharmacy technicians had a huge role in helping those things operate smoothly. And I think sometimes we forget that there are these people working behind the scenes to make all these things happen. Likewise, with immunizations, it's the simple things like, well, I shouldn't say simple, but things like inventory, scheduling appointments, reminding people to come back for their second dose. Those are all roles that pharmacy technicians have stepped into that maybe, is not quite at the level of administering the immunization, but is absolutely critical to getting everybody vaccinated. And so I think that's probably the biggest way their roles have changed, is that they have kind of taken on more behind the scenes work in a lot of cases that, people sometimes take for granted, especially if they're the person on the receiving end of getting that vaccine or getting that COVID test.
Right. Now let me ask you, so in a lot of the work that I do on the pharmacist side, whenever we're talking about advancing scope of practice, and I always have to include the payment piece. And so I wonder, like you said, in terms of job satisfaction, there is this question about payment for salary. And so where are the areas where technicians are having the ability to advance and get the salary increases? Like where is that opportunity? Where are those bubbles, I guess?
Yeah, well, so one of the more current things that I have heard very recently, as of just a couple of days ago, is that there are employers, and in fact, the independent pharmacist that I mentioned just a little bit ago, he actually incentivized his technicians to get trained to do immunizations, both by covering the cost of training, but also by paying them a bonus. And now I know that doesn't necessarily equate long-term to salary, but he is offering an incentive. We have heard of employers that may offer a small bump in pay for technicians who are participating in providing immunizations. But I would say that the segment of pharmacy where we see a lot of opportunity for technicians to advance and have established career ladders is in the health system world, where there are really well-defined, in not everywhere, but in a lot of cases, well-defined roles for pharmacy technicians, or well-defined levels of responsibility within an organization that not only come with more responsibility, but also come with a bump in pay. It can be a little bit more difficult on the community side because maybe there aren't as many specific unique roles in those settings, but that's not to say they don't exist. I think immunizations has provided sort of what I hope will be a launch pad, to have technicians who maybe are the people who are focused on immunizations, or you mentioned product verification, right? Maybe there will become these more well-defined career ladders, but it's not something that's going to happen overnight, unfortunately. But I think that the community world can look to the health systems that have done it really well and have, they have the training that gets technicians to those various levels. In some cases, there are credentials that are built into those career ladders.
Ask about, because I know I've seen some things come out from PTCB about new certifications that you offer, and are a lot of those certifications required for the advancement within the hospital systems, or not required, but looked well upon, I guess.
Yeah.
The word is like what you guys are doing, how does that support maybe the advancement for technicians within hospital systems in particular?
Yeah, so I view the credentials, that especially the new credentials that we've created, as tools for pharmacy technicians and employers to build those career ladders within their organizations. Our goal, now keep in mind, these new credentials have only been around for a couple of years, but we have heard from some health systems who say, we are incorporating these into job descriptions, or we are offering these to technicians who want to pursue them, but we're covering the cost because we see it as professional development and something that gives them some satisfaction and hopefully helps keep them around longer, right? So I think I'm calling them tools because I think they have a lot of different purposes. They can serve as kind of that professional development. Maybe they can get a technician from level 1, 2, 3, or 4, or into some specific role. So a good example of that is one of the credentials is around medication history. And so in some hospitals, there are pharmacy technicians that work in the emergency department or in other areas of the hospital, and they're responsible for med history. And so that credential is really well aligned with that specific role within an institution. Whereas the product verification credential, while that's certainly happening in health system pharmacy, is also very applicable to community pharmacy in the states that allow that. So again, I see these, we consider them to be voluntary credentials, right? We're not pushing boards or employers to mandate them, but that can certainly happen, as employers and regulators see the value of those credentials.
Okay. And I think I've heard a lot of technicians have had advanced roles within the federal pharmacy system. Do you know a little bit more about that? Is it Department of Defense or where is that?
So within it's really all. So the
Okay.
VA, Indian Health Service, DoD, pharmacy technicians, for example, with immunizations, they've been doing it for a really long time.
Okay.
Doing the final check on prescriptions, they've been doing it for a really long time. And we can probably learn a lot from them. It is very different, though, in terms of the training. There's a lot of consistency in DoD in particular with the way that pharmacy technicians are trained. And I think if you look across the general pharmacy profession, that's not true, right? How a technician enters the workforce in Maryland is different than how they enter the workforce in neighboring DC or Virginia, right? And so I think that the consistency in training in the military or in the VA or Indian Health Service has really helped them take what we consider to be advanced roles, very common everyday roles that technicians are engaging in within those organizations.
Okay. And within the Department of Defense roles, are they civilian positions or are they part of someone's military service or is it both? Like, how do you get into that?
Yeah, so unfortunately I don't know
Okay.
specifically. I do think it's both based on some of the conversations we've had with the folks responsible for training there, but I'm not positive.
Okay. All right. Well, we have covered a lot of the questions that I had. One of the things that I always ask about is I'm talking to a lot of healthcare providers, and um, you all get into this work to help people, but we have to always remind ourselves you got to help yourself too. And
Mhm.
so I am very interested in wellness. And so I'm going to ask you, so what do you do to kind of keep yourself together and to kind of support your wellness journey and take care of yourself?
Well, I will say that it has evolved a lot over the last year. And in particular, I think, a little over a year ago when we first started working from home, I always felt just very disheveled because I didn't have a routine, and commuting from my home to the office, even though it was a short commute, was part of the routine. And it was like the start and the end of the day. And now I don't really have that anymore. So for me, one of the big things is working out, particularly in the morning. And I can really tell if I don't do that, that I feel differently throughout the course of the entire day. The other thing that really helped was getting a dog. Like a lot of other
Oh,
people
yes.
during the pandemic, we adopted a puppy
Okay.
who was about 6 months old when we got him. And so he, forces us to go outside multiple times a day, go on walks. And I think it really helps to kind of disconnect from work for those periods of time, right? Even if it's for 10 or 15 minutes in the middle of the day when he needs to go out, it gets me away from my computer and out of the apartment that I've been mostly inside of for the last year. And so I think, for anybody else who's in the work from home situation, just finding a way to kind of disconnect for a few minutes every now and then, even you don't have to get a dog to do that, but, just stepping away has really, really helped me.
Yeah, my friends laugh at me, but I am one of those people that drives over to the Starbucks drive-through, gets a little treat, and I just sit in the parking lot and open the sunroof in my car, and I sit there. And sometimes I'm doing meetings, but it's just a way to just sort of separate. Because, like many people, I've got everybody home doing lots of different things, and yeah, sometimes you do just need a break to get away. And I do the walks as well. So I think it's this time has really just given people an opportunity to realize how beneficial health is,
Mhm.
and that yeah, that 10-minute walk can make a difference. It can really make
Absolutely.
a difference.
Yeah, it's also, the other thing that we took up early on in the pandemic was eating a lot of ice cream and baked goods. And, while that has probably helped with my well being, probably something that we need to finally cut down on now that it's been a whole year.
Yes, it's like you didn't really realize as it was happening, like everybody was just eating everything because that's
Yeah.
what you did. People were probably drinking a lot more than they normally would. And I personally, I hit this point like, oh my God. I looked at a picture of myself and I said, this is it. So I've now finally lost the COVID 20, like I gained 20 pounds. So I lost that. And so I'm still trying to get back to where I used to be. But yeah, it's, yeah, you didn't realize all the things that were kind of happening and that it's been a year.
Mhm.
Just unbelievable. But
It is hard to believe. I can't wait to get back to
some,
traveling and going
right.
to meetings in person and that kind of thing.
Yes. So these are actually have been really enjoyable for me, doing these interviews, because they're for me, they're kind of like the meetings, because it's a time to just sort of chit chat and catch up and
Yeah.
get some extra information, but not a formal sit down meeting where you got to take notes and that sort of thing. So it's been great to really to catch up with you, and I appreciate all the ways we've been able to collaborate with MPHA and PTCB, and I look forward to more opportunities for that. So thank you for
Well,
being with us today.
yeah, thank you, Aaliyah. This was fun. I enjoyed it.
Thanks. And I will just say that you can follow Ryan on Twitter at RMBPharmD. I like the way it rhymes. And then at PTCB is the organization. And again, on LinkedIn, Ryan M. Burke. And then also you can just look up the company. And so again, thank you.
Thank you, Aaliyah.
Thanks for watching, and please be sure to like, subscribe, and rate the podcast on all major podcast platforms. We look forward to dropping more great conversations, and of course, sponsorship opportunities are available. Just contact us at MPHA. Thanks.